It began over the Black Sea. A young Ukrainian pilot ejects into freezing water after his jet is destroyed, his distress call echoing across the command network. Within minutes, Kyiv makes a choice: do nothing, and Russia controls the sea unquestioned, or retaliate with something no fleet had seen before. They launch Operation Black Storm, an attack not with missiles or ships, but with a storm of drones. What unfolded next wasn't just a counter-strike, it was a blueprint for future warfare where the smallest machines break the biggest giants. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. A single missile worth over $2.5 million cut through the sky and shredded a Ukrainian MiG-29 at 14,000 feet. In less than 5 seconds, the radar beam locked, the missile left its launcher, and the warhead did its job. A pilot with fewer than 400 hours of combat flight time was forced to eject, his parachute opening against the harsh blue air as his destroyed jet smashed into the waves. That one missile cost more than the annual operating budgets of entire villages back home. And yet for Russia, it was just another launch order from a Bain-M-class warship floating confidently off Crimea. On that day, Moscow announced it as a technical success, proof that their latest naval defenses worked flawlessly against Ukrainian aircraft. But in the cold water below, a 26-year-old pilot was struggling to keep his head above the surface in water barely 54 degrees Fahrenheit, waiting for a rescue flare to be seen amid the confusion of radar contacts and engine noise. The image of his parachute drifting into the sea was played endlessly by Russian state television. Their commentators boasted about precision and power, holding it up as an example of deterrence. The Kremlin suggested this was not just the downing of a plane, but a statement. Russia controlled the skies and seas around Crimea, and anyone who stepped near would be erased. The strike wasn't random. It was a measured act, carried out by a Black Sea vessel designed to broadcast power. And the math told its own story. One pilot with 2 years of active duty service versus a missile that ate through millions with the push of a button. Operations officers in Kyiv saw the imbalance not as a battlefield mistake, but as a challenge deliberately issued. Inside Ukrainian command centers, the options spread across the table were simple but devastating. They could retaliate with manned sorties, hurling additional aircraft into the danger zone, knowing each launch would invite more radar locks and more costly Russian missiles. They could attempt a direct missile strike of their own, but supplies were limited and expensive, or they could gamble on something unorthodox, something that would seem reckless until the details became clear. Rather than send ringed formations of jets and large cruise missiles, commanders began sketching out something very different. A massive push of cheap, homemade, unmanned vehicles, not a handful for harassment, but a swarm. The logic grew more compelling with every figure written on the board. Russia had burned $2.5 million for one aircraft. Ukraine could construct and assemble hundreds of small strike-capable drones for a fraction of that. Each cost no more than a second-hand pickup truck. Each could be guided with commercial-grade systems and fitted with basic explosives. Add them up, combine them into waves, and the cost rose to just under $3 million, barely more than the price of the single missile that had downed their pilot. In pure economic terms, it was an even trade. In psychological terms, it was a potential earthquake. The mission was given a name, Operation Black Storm. It called for nearly 1,000 drones launched in successive attacks, each step calibrated to burn through Russian defenses until the steel hulls of their ships were naked and vulnerable. If it worked, a fleet worth hundreds of millions could be put out of action by parts built in ordinary workshops, assembled with plywood frames and hobbyist engines. The gamble was high risk, but the message was simple. National survival did not require matching Russia weapon for weapon. It required changing the equation. But could improvised machines built from cheap electronics really bring down a Bain-M-class warship priced at $85 million and armed with radar, cannons and interceptors designed for aerial sieges? That was the question Ukraine was now prepared to test as hundreds of engines were fueled, propellers were mounted, and the first launches of the swarm began. What does it take for wooden frames, off-the-shelf motors, and basement-level electronics to challenge armor plating, overlapping radar fields, and sophisticated naval weapons priced in the millions? On paper, the math doesn't work. Naval ships like the Russian Bain-M are designed to withstand barrages from advanced missiles and manned aircraft, not flimsy contraptions that look closer to hobby projects than battlefield machines. But Ukraine's command understood that the value wasn't in one drone alone. It was in quantity, timing, and the deliberate exhaustion of the enemy's most expensive tools. That logic drove the launch sequence of Operation Black Storm, 3 massive waves totaling 950 drones, each wave tailored to exploit a specific weakness of the ship's layered defenses. The Bainem-class vessel waiting off Crimea was no light target. Its designers intended it to operate like a fortress at sea, watching the skies and the waterline with multiple overlapping systems. Its long-range radar arrays scoured the horizon, mapping out anything airborne within miles. On deck, twin autocannons were fixed to cover the approach zone, spewing hundreds of rounds per minute at anything that broke through the first perimeter. Beyond that, the crew relied on naval interceptors costing roughly $80,000 apiece. Missiles programmed to destroy incoming threats before they even crossed into effective range. Standing alone, the ship seemed untouchable, but it wasn't armored for swarms. The first wave of the attack left the Ukrainian-controlled coast just before sunrise. 200 small unmanned aircraft lifted off in formation, their motors nothing more than buzzing blades, their bodies mostly wood and composite. They weren't built to strike, their purpose was deception. Each carried a simple transmitter broadcasting a radar signature similar to a cruise missile. They climbed to 1,500 feet and spread out across the sky, filling screens with false targets. Officers inside the vessel's command module suddenly faced a cluttered field of high-speed contacts bearing straight in. Cannons began hammering at the sky. The interceptors unlocked and ripped upward, millions of dollars evaporating in bursts of contrails and warhead detonations against plywood targets. 20 minutes later, before the gun barrels had even cooled, the second element appeared. Another 200, this time armed, came in at speed and altitude. These weren't decoys. They carried high-explosive warheads and drove straight into the warship's defensive circle. The Bainem responded exactly as designed. More interceptor missiles shot upward, another batch of millions lost in seconds. The autocannons found their mark against several targets, shredding wings and fuselages that tumbled flaming into the sea. But efficiency didn't matter. Magazines ran low, reloads jammed amid the frantic pace, and crew fatigue stacked up. For Ukraine, every interception amounted to a victory. The loss of an aircraft worth maybe $3,000 forced a defense worth tens of times more. Then came the final surge. 550 drones hugged the surface of the Black Sea, skimming at low altitude, slipping under radar coverage. By the time the ship's sensors picked them up, almost half were already inside lethal range. They attacked in clusters, striking at locations calculated to cause maximum chaos. Fuel storage, ammunition lockers, fire control systems. One drone burrowed straight into the deck, detonating deep inside the vessel. Flames spread, igniting 12,000 gallons of fuel. A split second later, secondary explosions leapt from munition stores, throwing shockwaves through compartments and tearing through bulkheads. Sections of the ship lifted under the force, fragments raining across the deck as sirens wailed and crew members scrambled for survival. An $85 million warship collapsing under the weight of drones that cost less than $3 million shows something undeniable. Expensive steel and radar can be overwhelmed by ingenuity and mass. The old logic of dominating oceans with billion-dollar vessels may no longer hold when swarms can do what missiles, submarines, or aircraft once could at a fraction of the price. So ask yourself, if Ukraine can field homemade drones to cripple a modern warship, what does that mean for navies relying on giant fleets? Let me know in the comments how you think this changes the balance of power worldwide.